next thing I want to talk about is what I just mentioned before. How do these 5 elements relate to Hung Gar? What does it actually mean in Hung Gar? Because in Hung Gar we play forms, we have different movements, we learn all sorts of things. And actually the 5 elements in Hung Gar is rather simple. And if we talk about the fire element, we can narrow that down and say it basically we see straight, powerful strikes, punches and kicks. And we can think about it as a lightning bolt if we want to relate it to the fire element, which has that sort of straight concept. And also it's very long distance. So if I'm sort of 5 inches from someone, I'm probably not going to use a lot of very straight things because they're not going to be that powerful. And so it's more referring to in the fire movements are more longer in distance than up close. The next one is the earth, and this represents attacks from the ground coming upwards, and so it means we have to be very well rooted in the earth on the ground, and so we've got this sort of lifting ability from the ground upwards. And we see that in many movements in Hung Gar. And usually it's more of a close distance. These are not usually represented in long distance away. The next one is the element of metal. And these are usually powerful and descending downward strikes. So there's something coming downwards, as if we're going to cut something or split it or divide it up like a metal weapon. So you can think of an axe or a sword coming downwards and destroying something. And in order to do that, it's more than likely we're medium distance or we can even be close up. And the water element is the long flowing and swinging movements of the arms and the legs. So we can equate this to a wave in the sea approaching, and it's more long distance. So if we think of the wave coming towards us, it's very difficult to block. We have to sort of be subsumed by the wave. We have to somehow work out how we're going to do that. And I can explain a little bit about that in a moment. And then if we look at the wood element, this is usually short to medium range movements. And they often have both a block and a strike associated with them. So they're usually both penetrating and intercepting. So you're intercepting something and you're penetrating at the same time. And we can think about it as wood can very easily be molded into different shapes to suit the task. And so it's more than often a very close distance movement in terms of our fighting strategy. There's several movements in Hung Gar that represent wood. The first one that comes to mind is the Ngam Mok Choi, which is the duck, I'll translate the exact words, duck wooden punch. I don't know what it's called in English, but in Chinese it's called Ngam Mok Choi. And there's others, and they are very close fighting.
So what form or what particular forms we have these all kind of the elements in Hung Gar?
Well, there's a form called Kuen.
Okay.
And that represents the 5 elements and the 5 animals within that one form. So Kuen has Yang and Hung. Hung is the 5 elements and the Yang is the 5 animals. And that makes up the Kuen, the 10 things in Kuen. So they're very easy to see in that particular form. But they also exist in some other forms.
Right.
So that very simply introduces the movements in Hung Gar that we play that are the elements, each of the elements. But when we do that, that's a very superficial view of the elements. Yes, we need to know how to play them, but it's rather superficial because there's a number of things we need to consider. And one of the things, as I alluded to a short while ago, is, for example, how do we overcome things in Hung Gar, in a fighting strategy? And we can use this diagram and that cycle of overcoming things, the destructive cycle. We can use that concept to think ourselves about a strategy. So, for example, if we have an opponent that is using a lot of straight techniques relating to the fire element, we know that water will overcome fire. So we can start to consider that if we use some of the water movements, we have a good idea, a good chance of using that to overcome fire. So we can use things like Soilong Pao Choi, which is the water movement that we see in Mian Kuen and many other forms, as a very good technique to overcome fire. If someone insists on just attacking you with these long, straight punches, yes, you can block them, you can run away. So there's many different ways of evading. But you can also attack using the water movements. And
this is a kind of advanced level of the practical use of these kind of techniques one against each other, because you need to understand what particular movement represents the elements before you learn how they against or controlling other elements.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
That should be the very advanced level of Hung Gar.
And that will work with each of these elements. So if someone is using sort of earth technique, so they're probably very close distance, there's something coming up, they're well rooted to the ground, they're generating a lot of power, then you can use the wood movements, which are also close up. And remember, you're intercepting and you're also penetrating. So you can destroy their movements by doing that. And yes, there's many other techniques, including running away. All these things are also effective, but I'm just giving an example of people to think about. And I'm not suggesting you think about these in the midst of fighting or a battle, because you should not be doing that. If you're not
very important.
If you're not sufficiently experienced to be able to use these things as an automatic habit, then you shouldn't be fighting.
You just can't think, hey, stop, give me one minute and then think about the theory first before I punch. Or
that's right.
No sense.
Yeah. What we aim to achieve, this is my own understanding, and certainly what I've tried to do, is you start with playing the forms. Okay, we learn movements and so on, and we get fairly expert at them, and then we learn the routine, and so okay, we now know how to play the whole form, and so we've achieved the thing called memory. So we've got muscle memory, we can play through it. But there's another stage. We must develop this concept of our own consciousness, our own awareness is actually watching us. We achieve that level of consciousness as if we are an observer. We should not be using our consciousness to think what the next movement is, etc. That becomes automatic. And so the form that we play becomes part of our unconscious capability. So we can just play it. We don't need to think what's next. And that's a very important step that we need to achieve. And if you have not achieved that step and you want to position yourself as a fighter and go and fight people, then you're heading for danger, because you need to enter into a fight with a strategy that everything is automatic. You're just going to respond. You don't have to think what to do. You're observing yourself. Okay, you're not observing each movement one by one. You're observing yourself as if you were sitting on the sideline watching. So that needs to be your conscious level. And the first time we need to achieve that is playing the forms. If you're forever forgetting what the next movement is, whatever, then you haven't achieved that level. And that takes quite a long time to get to that level. So there's been a lot of things I talked about here, and I just want to summarize. And the most important takeaway I would like people to have is that these 5 phases or elements that we think about, it should be a mindset. It should be a way of thinking about life, health, nature, etc., and many, many other things, as well as Hung Gar. So we should now begin to formulate that these 5 elements are a mindset within Hung Gar that we need to be mindful of, because we need to take care of our health, our emotions, you know, our physical well-being, our mental well-being, all of these things. And the 5 elements should be a reminder of that to us. So I don't want people just to think of the physical 5 elements as being everything there is. It's just the beginning. That should be the trigger that sets off these other realizations. So the 5 phases is a system of nature's functionality influencing the earth where we live. And obviously it is part of us. It's inherent in ourselves. And we can't escape these 5 phases. They rule our life, and they're an important part of Hung Gar to remind us of that, and to make us mindful of how we can use them and how we can benefit from them. And so I'm just going to quickly step through here to summarize what we've talked about. So we introduced this concept of how everything began, the 5 phases, how heaven and earth began, and how the nature expanded into the 5 elements. We talked about the 5 spirits, which we talked about when we mentioned the 5 animals. We introduced the relationship between the 5 spirits and the 5 animals as very important. We then talked about the 5 unique characteristics relating to each phase, and I only talked about 7 of those characteristics, and there's hundreds of them. But it was an introduction to give you an understanding of the relationship between certain things we all experience in life and the 5 phases. And then I introduced these 2 cycles, the supportive cycle and the destructive cycle, and how sometimes we can use that and try to understand that in our life. And then I talked about how they relate to the 5 elements. The 5 elements relate to the organs in the body. And then I introduced what does it mean in Hung Gar. So that gave us the understanding of what the 5 elements are. So that's all I wanted to say about it. It's a big topic. and it's important that we understand as Hung Gar practitioners what it all means. We may only play a few movements that represent the elements, but there's a much deeper meaning that we should be mindful of in Hung Gar.
Yes, yes. It's not just about the outlook, and then what talk is not just about the elements. It's not the material things. It's a bit like phasing, as you say, it's a movement and implicit things behind the name of like fire. It's not just about the material stuff.
That's right.
Same as a Hung Gar movement. It's just not about the outlook of the movement. It looks like, oh, okay, there's a fire movement, but it is a deep knowledge behind it. Why you use it, and then what is the purpose of use it for, and how it helps to maintain the balancing of your body, even the emotional sensation things or the organ things. They all have a correlation between all these elements.
Yes, that's correct.
With a good health and good life.
Yes, and remember, we're playing Hung Gar. I mean, you and I are long-term practitioners, so you could say that we've created a weapon of ourselves based on Hung Gar. So how do we take care of the weapon? You know, we don't want it to rust and not be useful, so we need to take care of ourselves. And to me, that's what these 5 elements and also 5 animals represent and make us mindful of. We have a responsibility to do that.
And also, so most of the when the audience, I mean, they watch us to play Hung Gar, most of them, they think this is a very relatively hard kind of martial art, I would say, that compared with the Tai Chi, for example, and or Wing Chun as well. And if we talk about like Yin Yang, they will talk about, oh, this is very hard, this is the Yang things. So, but actually, when we are doing the Hung Gar, we're not trying to lose the balance. So we do the Yin things and the Yang thing as well, the hard and soft things as well. But as it talks about the balancing, and then maybe we perform like a very hard emotion things or outlook things. But behind that, we practice this. We try to make a balance. We do the chi movement, very slow down, soft movement. Just people can't see it. Just they don't see it, or they have no interest to watch it. That's a fact.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that we didn't do it. We don't do it. No, we keep doing it. And then it is important for the other Hung Gar practitioner that they don't mix that kind of soft things. The hard and soft, it should be have a balance between that.
Yes.
Same as the 5 phases, 5 elements.
Yes, that's right. And so again, we begin to see in many things in the Chinese culture, the definitions are not necessarily as simple as we would like if we compare it to the sort of Western mindset. The Western mindset has been developed and influenced by science and the sort of Newtonian physics, and it's often about a reductionist approach. So we reduce things down to their most simple level, and so we start to define the metal element as iron and steel. That's it. Whereas in the Chinese culture, as I've said before many times, it's about functionality. We're not then interested in the one thing that defines this. We're interested in all of the functions that represent this. And that becomes much more important in the sort of classical Chinese understanding of all of these things. And that's how it's all developed. We've talked about that before. So in many ways, it's very difficult for the Western mindset to relate to things that are part of the Chinese culture, because it's not necessarily as black and white. So I hope that gives everybody an understanding of the 5 elements in Hung Gar and what they perhaps can start to be mindful of when they play these things. Okay, thanks again, and we'll meet up in the next episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for your sharing for today.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Sifu.